the live transcript as well. So if people want to turn their captions on, they can.
Great. Okay, great. So hopefully Ken Barons is with us tonight. I don't know if that's a bit of a captioning joke. You'll have to look it up. Anyway, so look, thank you everybody for joining us today. It's great to have Dan Feldman joining us, and I'll talk more about Dan's talk. Hopefully in the breakout rooms prior to this, you would have had a bit of a conversation around your views on analytics and your views on how design can be infused with analytics or even brought in to enrich what we do within the analytics projects that we might be involved in or we might see being delivered. So that's sort of the content we're talking about today. I'm really looking forward to tonight's talk. It's bringing these two domains together that sort of are really going to be really powerful. So in the context of the chat, will get going very shortly. I do want to make sure we pause and reflect on the traditional custodians of the land that we are meeting on. Now, I have made my way into the city because we are free, as they say, in the current COVID world, and I'm quite grateful for that. But we're meeting on or at least Ben, Nathan, and I are in the Gadigal country of the Eora Nation, and I want to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and really draw on that culture that and wisdom that those cultures before us can really teach us. In the context of your own location, please obviously pay your respects to whichever region that you are coming in and joining us from. So in the context of our organiser, I really want to make a call out to our usual suspects. So Ben, Zoe, Kate, for their contributions to making this a reality. And as always, we need to thank our sponsors, ThoughtWorks, who, even if it's not a physical room, they are providing our virtual room in this Zoom setting. We're hopefully looking forward to doing it again in person. So we'll have some conversations around that, how we do that over the coming weeks and months, and as we can open up and have a chat. Now, that being said, we do have another meetup coming up on the 2nd of December, which is our mega meetup where we get all our design meetup colleagues together. We're too collaborative, inclusive to compete with one another. So we do love the community, the design community. We all get together on a regular occasion. So we're going to be doing a mega meetup on the 2nd of December. So have a look out for that. Jump in and register, and come and have some fun and actually meet some of your design colleagues face to face in your design and get some real live networking happening in person, which will be great. So I do want to spend a bit of time and just introduce Dan, our speaker tonight. Dan, I had the benefit of meeting Dan. Oh God, I can't remember how long ago. It was a long time ago when I was working as a design thinking coach back at CBA, and I think Jane Coburn ran a Vivid event, and we were brought in as coaches within that event to help facilitate that. And that was the first time I came across Dan. We had a great time just having chats, planning the event, also a few beers shared afterwards, and a couple of dinners, and kept in contact since. So Dan is a really forward thinker, I would say, in the context of what he does. He's definitely creative. He's definitely bold. He'll tell you what he thinks. He doesn't have a filter on his opinion, which is fantastic. He's from Boston, so everyone from Boston is renowned for being very upfront, and he's moved to Sydney. And, you know, Australians, we love being upfront as well. So you put those two together, and it's just a secret source of freedom of thinking and opinions. Dan's worked in a number of roles in design. I think when I met him, he was a design lead at Telstra and has moved on to various roles. And some of the content he's sharing with us tonight was based on his time when he was at McKinsey. He was working for a startup offshoot within McKinsey that was focused on the analytics side and really bringing in that design element. So he's going to share a lot of his insights in that space, both from that context of what he was working on, but also in the consulting and the thought leadership that McKinsey would bring to these spaces. So I'm really looking forward to this. No pressure, Dan. Don't let us all down. But I'm really confident we're going to be really engaged with the conversation. I do invite people to bring up some of those conversations that you had earlier. Let's make this interactive and engaging. We want to promote conversation and sharing of thoughts and sharing of opinions. So don't be shy. And with that, I'll hand over to Dan, and you can take over the reins, Dan, and share some of your wisdom.
Thanks, Lucas. I appreciate the no pressure intro. I cannot screen share, actually. You mind if I take that back? Thank you.
Yep.
And can you let me know? I need to allow Zoom. Excuse me, guys. I need to allow Zoom to screen share. But while we're going, I think actually this talk needs to be slightly renamed, where it's a bit less about how, actually. And can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. And a bit more about.
Oh, that's a good point. It's if you've got two screens, we're not seeing the slides.
Yep. Now you can, correct?
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah.
Right. So over the time, I found that actually giving people the kind of tips and tricks is useful, but a lot of the problem that we as designers and actually data scientists find is having the proposition, the real reason why these two disciplines work better together. And that was the biggest unlock I found when I was working at McKinsey as a data science translator with our Quantum Black group. And as I'm finding now, working in my current role where I lead product innovation at a startup called Omniscient, which is also a very big, ambitious name. But I guess the company's fairly ambitious as well. So I currently lead a team of data scientists, designers, developers, marketers, kind of the whole shebang. But our goal is to create a world where our brains are no longer these kind of mysterious things that live between our ears that make us feel and think and act in certain ways, but it's actually kind of part of our selves, our known selves that we can understand and look forward to and use to answer everyday life's problems. Again, fairly ambitious, but through this process of kind of understanding how to use this human-centered approach to connect with the analytical approach, it's really been able to unlock some of the capabilities. I'd rather this not be a me talking for an hour thing. I am going full screen though, so if anybody has any questions, I'm going to dob Lucas in if there's anything in the chat, or just pause, shut me up, and I'm happy to have a conversation more than just me sharing my thinking. I don't think I'll talk for an hour either way, but that could change. I've been known to have a little rant. So tonight, what we're really going to talk about is integrating design into advanced analytics. Now, there's definitely merit in going the other way, in finding out how to integrate analytics into a kind of design-led approach, but both of them are almost an entire evening's worth of topics. And if you're a data scientist and you want to talk about how you can kind of work better on product teams, feel free to ping me and we can have that conversation. This is specifically focused on being a designer, working with an analytics team, and how you can and why you can find a way for you to work better together. And this is mostly just experiences, lessons learned, key insights that have really helped me unlock this integration and collaboration. I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that the world today is getting much more complicated. And the bar for organizations to actually stay competitive is so much higher than it had ever been. And it's kind of continuously rising with competition coming from out of the blue. Startups, globalization, there are all of these pressures now on organizations to be moving faster and better. And we see that starting to show up as organizations increasingly invest in both analytics and design to solve their complex problems. I mean, we've seen a massive increase in investment in both of these spaces in the last 10 years. And it's pretty clear that both are having a positive impact. So at McKinsey, we did two separate analyses. One was focused on the impact that advanced analytics and artificial intelligence, we kind of grouped them together, have on industries. And we found about a $4.6 trillion impact, give or take. And then separately, we followed 300 organizations over a 5-year period and looked at all their use of design and compared them, the ones that were kind of high design organizations to ones that were low design organizations. If you're interested in that, it's called The Business Value of Design, publicly available. Good read. And if you're a designer in an organization arguing for resource and value, super useful set of numbers. What we found from that is companies that really commit and do design as part of their core outperform their peers by a wide margin. So we saw 32% higher revenue and up to 50% annual return to shareholders. So both very powerful disciplines in their own right. But the question is, why aren't they being integrated together? What we did find is that organizations that tightly interweave these two, design and analytics, see somewhere between a 10 and 30% performance improvement. So what's stopping us from spending more time together? I thought part of it was that on the surface, design and analytics are quite different. You think analytics is technical, it's machine learning, artificial intelligence. It looks for patterns anchored in data and patterns at scale, it's kind of mass patterns. Whereas design is the opposite. It's creative, it's empathetic. It looks at these kind of deep patterns in people's experiences. It's primarily qualitative, and it looks kind of at the motivations and the drivers of things. It's a bit more of the why. But after years of working to bring these two disciplines together, what I really started to think about them more like is yin and yang, these like opposite forces that kind of come together to create harmony. They're quite different, but also very similar. They're just two lenses to put on the world to try to get a view of reality, this accurate view of reality. Analytics looks for patterns in data, but design looks for patterns in humans. We're just trying to find some truth in different places. Now, we know, I like to think about them working together as creating this whole brain approach. The creative and the analytical, the human and the machine, like together, they're better than the sum of their parts. Now, what's the real value and why do they work better together? Right? It kind of makes sense. They're equal and opposite. They're both powerful in their own right. But this was the big unlock for convincing essentially data science teams to bring designers along on the journey. Because they have these complementary elements, but design brings something that was outside of what data science was traditionally doing. Yep. Somebody got something to say? No, I'll keep going. All right. I call this the missing third lens. Designers, probably data scientists, familiar with this model, right? So when we think about solving complex problems, there are three macro elements, right? There is customer desirability. Do people want it? Technical feasibility, can we make it? And business viability, is there good economics in doing it? Can we make money? And what I observed over my time working with data scientists is that technical feasibility, almost always there. Business viability, often there, especially as we started to introduce more translators. But desirability, rarely included. And this missing lens was leading to a lot of the key failure modes that we were finding in data science applications. And organizations were really just not reaching the potential value of advanced analytics. And we're talking 4.6 trillion, and very few of them were getting the impact that they should have. Now, let's talk a bit about these failure modes, because I think they're pretty important. The three white ones are the ones that are primarily design and analytics, except for the first one, which is really about not having the data. And the other two are reasons that we saw people actually reject the use of models, right? If we have any data scientists on the call, how many of you have ever built a model, this absolute triumph of data science, this amazing model that it solves problems in a really elegant and complex way, but it just ends up sitting on a shelf somewhere? And I don't know, I can't see if there are any hands up, but that was what we found happened all the time when we would be building.
If just for context, Dan, Nat, who works in analytics, just groaned and grunted.
Good. I'm glad I'm striking a chord somewhere. It is you're right, Lucas. It's really hard to do this stuff over Zoom because you get no feedback, right? So for what we found is that design was best suited for use cases where people were critical to the delivery of the analytical outcomes. There are some data science use cases where it's just pure automation, less useful there. There's still, you're going to have to kind of visualize the impact of the automation, build a dashboard to show it. There will be people involved, but the most useful ones are people are critical for the delivery of the value. Because you have to have behavior change and mindset change. But by not integrating the desirability lens, what we found is that you miss the change management until the very end. You build a whole model and then you try to throw it over the fence and incentivize or force people to use it. And it just was not working, right? They were really hard to use. They were not solving the right problem. People didn't trust them. And oftentimes what that would lead to is these kind of long, expensive change management processes where, you'd spend all this time and money, pay McKinsey to come in and try to convince your people to create a whole new workflow to use this complicated, hard to use analytical model. When in fact, integrating design starts thinking about adoption from the start. So when you're integrating customers and what they need, you start thinking about what will increase adoption from day one, so that by the time you build your model and it's launched into the hands of the people who are going to use it, they're already excited to use it. They've probably already seen it before, and usability and adoption goes way up. I'm going to stop there. Any thoughts, any questions?
There is one question. It's sort of a bit of a tangent, but it's probably worthwhile asking it around what role does synthetic data have in the future of analytics? And in the context of human-centered, like how does synthetic data and real human data actually sort of, what's the relationship between those things potentially?
I do not have a good answer for that. Is somebody else in the call? That's a bit outside of my area of expertise.
It's an interesting one though. I think because I think I'll oh, there's an echo. Yeah, providing an opinion though, it's almost, when you think about synthetic data, I suppose synthetic data has to have an AI algorithm probably to create it. So you probably need to think about sense the data. Or sense the data somehow. Sensor data. Yeah. So it's there's an element of analytics in creating data, and being aware of the biases that might be in that potentially is an interesting one. And maybe there's something around the bias that we might touch on in the talk potentially.
Yeah, I don't really touch on bias. I mean, bias is a really tricky one, right? Because a lot of what you build in analytics is based on how you train the data, and how you train the data, or train the model, and how you train the model is often based on the data you feed into it. And it's really hard to have completely unbiased data. So I think the most important thing is thinking about the bias that's being injected ahead of time. I always think about that Google facial recognition camera that didn't recognize people who had a darker skin tone than mine. And it was just kind of this complete lack of awareness of the bias that was being put into the system.
Voice recognition, not recognizing a non-American accent. It's a good one.
Yeah.
And maybe us Australians should just open our mouths more when we talk. That might be another one, which is not AI led. It's probably more me. No, thanks, Dan.
Yeah, cool. Anything else?
Nothing else come up. I think everyone's agreeing with the danger in bias that's introduced. So it's always an interesting concept in AI.
Cool. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about process. This can get a little bit dull, but stop me at any point if you have any specific questions. The reason I bring up this model, this is the Quantum Black McKinsey model, and this is not me to saying this is the right approach. Everyone has their different approaches in design. We have 4Ds, 5Ps, 7Fs. Like, there's so many different ways of conceptualizing the model. I use this as an anchor just because it's one that I'm familiar with, but the goal would be for you to apply the same thinking to whatever process and approach you use. Just to kind of orient you a bit, ideation is the phase where you generate the use cases that you can apply analytics to. Intelligence is where you kind of validate and size a business case. You do some of that viability, and then you can scope out the model building. Inceptions where you actually build the model, do that heavy feature engineering, and solve the really hairy data science problems. Interventions is where you start to transition and hand over that model and kind of track the changes, and then work your way into independence, where you actually hand over the model entirely to the users and have them run independently. Most of the failure points that I've just discussed happen at interventions and independence, where once it leaves the hands of the data scientists and the team building it, and it goes to the user, it's often just a complete disconnect between what you're building and the people who are trying to use it. Now,
actually, just a very interesting question around the process, Dan. There's a question from Ben around what happens when before ideation, do you collect data on things and what and why?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to kind of find your way into the decision of it's time for us to start using data science. The simplest one is, as a consultant, you come in when they already say, hey, we know we have this massive business problem. And it's we're losing 10% of efficiency on our supply chain. Help us figure out how to optimize. So that's often where it starts with the problem. Now, the other way to look at it is you can go in saying, we want to use data science. Let's go hunt down problems. So it's the belief that you're trying to build a capability. So that's another way I've seen it work. There's kind of almost endless. How do you start a project? Right? So you find that there's a need, and then you pick the right tool to solve for it.
Yeah, thanks.
Starting conversation though. Anybody else see any other interesting channels into starting to think through what you can do with analytics or even design?
Hein? Je les finis.
All right.
Sorry. That was the most insightful piece of
I don't have an answer for it either.
Sorry, before you go on, I think sentiment analysis on call center kind of data, that type of thing. So I guess it's a little bit reactive still, but at least you're analyzing tone and inflection, etc., on call center data.
Yeah, it's a great use case. Call centers are these incredible sources of opportunity because they're just these massive optimization problems. But there's call time, time on task, all of these kind of harder metrics, and then there are these amazing softer metrics about when to empathize, how to empathize, when to be forceful, how to be forceful, when to recommend. There's some really interesting stuff there. Not my cup of tea, but I have some people who have spent their entire careers working just with call centers.
Susan, did you want to ask? I think you've got a question. You want to ask your question?
No, well, Ben just embarrassed me. No, but my question was, I was trying to understand the distinction between when you're calling it advanced analytics versus just analytics.
Well, yeah. So, there is a fine line. Analytics could be anything from like business intelligence. You're looking at your finances. Usually, advanced analytics involves some sort of artificial intelligence, machine learning, kind of data science model, right? So, analytics. We've been doing business analytics from as long as there's been business. Right? You're tracking numbers. You're tracking time on task, you're tracking kind of how your people are working, right? Versus trying to take those numbers and find these really deep, unique insights at them at scale. And you solve, I know it's not a technical definition of advanced analytics, but hopefully that gives you the flavor.
It sounds like, Dan, that you want to try and come up with a name that stops the machine learners and the AI gurus saying machine learning isn't AI anymore, whereas advanced analytics could be seen as both. Because I always find that a funny conversation. Someone who's an AI, machine learning is not AI anymore.
You know, it's funny because in every discipline, we find ways to subset ourselves. Actually, I'll skip ahead a little bit because when I was talking to data scientists, they were shocked to find out there were different types of design. But, you know, you can say I'm a service designer, I'm a UI designer, I'm a UX designer. Like there are lots of different flavors, and there are people who will spend hours arguing the distinction. Whereas, you know, in my view, it's always been a good designer can flex. You have an area of specialty, but you have to be able to flex in any direction. Sorry, Alana, I think you have your hand up. Elena?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. My question is, you know, like bringing together designers and data scientists sometimes can cause issues. In your experience, how do you like make them work together effectively or collaborate effectively?
Yeah.
It usually comes with like communication where they don't understand where each other is coming from, or like even how they interpret different words, technical words, or the language.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Any disciplines coming together really actually have this kind of friction. In another version of this talk, I have little tips that I took out for this one. But there's a couple things that I would really recommend. One is, and it's going to be such a designer thing to say, but empathy. So spending the time to educate both groups about what the other one does is time very well spent. So when I first started working with Quantum Black, we would do lunch and learns. I would explain what design is, how it works, take them through the double diamond, each step of the method, some of our tools, and just the thinking behind it. I have found over my career, there is a breed of technical folk, data scientists, developers, who believe that their discipline can solve any problem, and there is no other discipline that's as valuable as theirs. So you take some time to win hearts and minds by explaining the thinking behind it. The other thing to do is make sure you're sharing insights frequently. The worst thing that can happen is designers go into their corner, data scientists go into their corner, data engineers sit in their corner, devs sit in their corner, and everyone just builds their own thing, and then you try to smash it all together at the end. So having, as designers we do our ethnographic research, come back and share the insights. And then as data scientists, you start to build the models, come back and share the insights. Because what it does is it creates this kind of push, this ebb and flow together where even if you're not really paying attention,
you okay, baby?
You influence the other person's thinking. The last one, there's one more that I think is really useful, is as a designer, walk people through the journey. I mean, it's such an overused tool, but an often underrated tool for creating a shared understanding. Where I found some of the most impact is actually in the ideation section. And this works where by mapping the end-to-end experience, I'm able to identify all these other factors outside of the data. Because remember, data scientists often spend their time primarily in the data, and the data is based on what we're measuring. What we're measuring is based on essentially what we choose to measure. So there are all these other influential factors outside of that measurement that actually are influencing the way things happen, right? I'm thinking about, I was working with a materials company, we'll say, and we were trying to do an optimization problem on a conveyor belt. And you look at the data and you say, oh, okay, we do it perfectly at this speed, and this speed's going to be the most optimal. But it turns out that there were all these other factors. There are people dumping things on the belt at different times. There are people putting things on the belt that weren't supposed to be there. There were people coming by and changing the speed based on their gut feel. So there are all these other factors that influence, and helping everyone see end to end where all those influential factors are is incredibly valuable, because it makes better models, because you think about all the factors ahead of time, or the features ahead of time. And you can start to gather data if you don't have it before you build the model. Super helpful.
Thanks, Dan. That was really helpful.
Thank you. I hope that's actually helpful and you're not just saying it for the group.
No, I'm actually going to try to do it. I actually had some experience recently where both, not with data scientists, but with my developer, And we were trying to ideate and explain our design from two different perspectives, where we're explaining the same thing, just using different languages as well. And it was just the most frustrating thing. It took a long time for us to get to a point where we're like, oh, we've been talking about the same thing this whole time. And I'm like, yeah, I think so. It'll probably just like be on me where I haven't explained myself clearly. And just learning how to speak different languages as well with DevOps or data scientists. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's such a great insight there, just in projects in general, not just analytics projects. It is what is the language you need to speak? So the business will speak one language, the designers will speak one language, the technical people will speak one language. The analytics guys will have their own semantics. And I'm curious, I think obviously when you talk about, you sort of touch on the journey, and I think sometimes that storytelling, doing that well can help, but it sounds like that's what I'm sort of getting out of this, Dan. You talk about the process and how you go through that journey, and using that to create a common language. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that as an opinion, or reflect on it.
I think that's a good way to put it. Right? Every project, if you're inside an organization, every organization has their own language as well. And so you have to learn the acronyms, and I'm working in a medical company for the first time, and God damn, do they love acronyms. There's that language, plus the discipline language, plus the project language, because you're often focused on a piece of the business that maybe you weren't working in before, or you have to start naming things certain ways. So a taxonomy can be useful. I remember when I first joined McKinsey, they give you a link to a place where you can look up something people say and see what it actually means. So I agree in the sense that working together to create artifacts that you then share and use both to drive your thinking, super valuable. And it's also, if you think about it as, the other side of it, which is the human management, having a shared language is a really powerful way to create community and a sense of togetherness. So if you want your project team to be cohesive, having them have their own language makes it feel more like a kind of an us thing.
And I actually believe as designers, we hold the license, or we have a big responsibility to drive that language, because ultimately we want to deliver an outcome to a customer, and ultimately it's their story that matters. And the more we get their story and let people get out of their perspective, so get out of the first perspective of the developer and move into who am I building this for, and see it from somebody's eyes, and then frame your language around that, can be really powerful.
Yeah, well, there was always the inside out risk of language where, and as a designer, our job is to bring the voice of the customer into the room so that we're all speaking the customer's language, as opposed to kind of taking our complexity and vomiting it on the customer and hoping that they kind of get it, or we can explain it to them. And that does touch on a bit of what the point is here of, while integrating design end to end, left to right, has value of thinking through adoption from the beginning. What language do you use? What structures do you use? Kind of how do you think about the experience that you're creating, and where you put your model is often, or your insights, that's often a big one of kind of the end-to-end experience. You may logically fit one place, but actually where the user wants to have the insights is a different point in the model. I had that happen once, but it can add value vertically, right, at each step of the way. So that while there is, the value proposition, the pitch essentially to the data science or analytics or developers of saying, hey, if you start early, we actually increase our adoption curve. But there's also, add intelligence, it kind of helps you find gaps in the data, or, come up with new features for the model. It also helps you bring stakeholders along on the journey very well. When you start to think farther down the curve, you're able to kind of UX test things towards inception and interventions. You actually can creatively problem solve data science problems, because when, if you're trying to build a model and the data is doing something really funky, it could very well be something that you can bring an insight from a qualitative lens to explain from having know how people work and interact in the organization. And also this kind of rapid user testing that we often do in our design lives really means that the first release can be picked up and shown, see the business impact. And I think that's the other thing that we often miss, is that when we're often, or at least in my experience, when building a model, the value of the model is not the model itself, it's the decision-making that the insights help people do, language aside, right? Where if I'm trying to make a choice about when to open a valve, if I have the right insight at the right time and I'm opening that valve more efficiently, that's money for the business, which is growth or efficiency, cost saving. So there is real value in getting this right the first time, because we start to see that impact earlier. Let me tell you a quick story, actually. It might help bring this to life. So I was working for an energy company. And the problem that the way energy works at a high level, right? You take a whole bunch of combustible material, let's just say coal for argument's sake, and you put it into a giant metal container and you light it on fire. And it turns into this massive fireball. And the heat from that fire takes water in pipes and turns it into steam. That steam goes through the pipes and drives a turbine, which drives energy, right? Or creates energy. Now, the problem is anybody who's ever barbecued, which I expect to be all of you, we are in Australia, is that when you burn combustible material, it's not clean smoke. There's some particulate in it, especially if you're doing something like charcoal. And when you do that en masse, especially with something like coal, especially dirty coal, which is often what gets burned in Australian power plants, that creates all of this soot that gets on the pipes. So it makes, when they get wrapped up in all this soot, the heat doesn't transfer as efficiently, which means that water doesn't turn into steam as much and you don't get as much energy. Now, we had an optimization problem here, because there are these things that clean all the soot off the pipes so that they can keep running efficiently for longer. Now, the optimization problem is if you use those things too much, you get the picture on the right, where these high-powered steam belts put a hole in a pipe, and when a pipe even has a pinhole, when it's under high steam pressure, it turns into like a fire hose and just destroys everything around it. You have to shut down for a couple of days. On average, a shutdown is about $1.5 million a day. But if you don't use it enough, you get the thing on the left, which is this like hardened volcanic rock that makes it impossible for heat to get into the pipes, which means you can't boil the water and you have to shut down anyway and jackhammer it off. So this optimization problem was pretty straightforward from an analytics perspective. You have to figure out when the most efficient time to use this cleaner is, and you can figure it out to extend the life of each boiler before you have to shut it down and clean it. Right? Now, the problem here was that the optimization model was the easy part. There were users at the site who had to push the button, and they were not going to automate this thing entirely. Long story, they had tried to do it before and it ended in disaster. So the biggest problem was they built the model, it made great sense, they launched it, and then nothing happened. So me and my team got sent out to the site, and we sat down with these users, and we learned a couple things. One is that they've been doing this job for 20 years, the exact same way. The average tenure was 12 years. Oldest guy had been there for 40. They were not really willing to change. The whole, it's worked this far, why would I change it? The second thing was that they already had been burned by models over the years. So they weren't going to trust the next new, and I'm almost quoting, new fandangled thing that came out of the analytics team. And the last one was actually that they were working in this hyper complex environment. You know, Lucas, earlier you had said, I'm used to having the control center with all of the screens. Each person had 12 screens, and it was really intense industrial UX, which was impossible to understand unless you've been there for 12 years. So they have a ton of information coming in at them at all times. Any new information was really hard to penetrate into the noise, to find the signal. So what we did is we used our good old-fashioned design tools, and we mapped their mental model about how they make a decision. And while it wasn't the optimal analytics approach, it got almost the same AUC. And it was something that they could trust and believe in because it thought the same way they did, just more efficiently. And then we actually designed the user experience to both integrate into the environment that they're in, but also have some unique features that stood out. Because when this thing needed to fire, it needed to fire now. So we had some really interesting techniques on how to make it incredibly visible and to kind of penetrate that visual noise. And the last thing was we integrated with them for weeks and actually spent time and worked with them and showed them the development of the UX and the model and did that change management all the way through. So by the time the model was finally released, they were already using it. And we saw the impact almost immediately, where we saw 33% increase in boiler life, which was about, we'll say, $4.5 million a year improvement in the bottom line.
So Dan, just an interesting question for me on that. Like, and I've got a similar story that from working in financial services for many years, where you have your robo advice in the wealth business, where you had financial planners coming in. They had to approve what the robo advisor would actually suggest for clients, or they could auto approve. And what was funny was what was seen in the business after they put the analytics in place to make suggestions. The planners kept going in and having to intercept and insert their thinking on top of it, because what the insight from that was generated from the analysis afterwards was that they saw their value, or they saw some self-worth in being involved in that decision. And if you take that away from them, then they felt disengaged and excluded from the process. And it sounds like a similar analogy in a different industry, which I find really interesting. Now, the question I have for you, in the sense of the way you frame it, almost you still want it to be automated and you still want to prompt them. It's almost like allowing the automation and the analytics to tell them what to do, but make it really visible to the point where they feel like they're making the decision themselves, but really it's the robot that's doing it. So it appeases that human emotion. So I'll just put that out there as a frame, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that was more of a statement than a question, but it's the right statement, right?
Yeah, but it's just framing that. So I can see the similarities in the two different industries and sort of see how you've sort of guided a horse to water. And
this is one of the biggest problems we have. It's a lot of it is the trust in the model, and also nobody likes to feel like their job's been taken or their autonomy is taken away. Basically, there are the three things that make us feel satisfied: autonomy, mastery, and self-efficacy. And if you take those three away by putting a model in place that takes away your ability to make a decision and feel like you have an impact on the outcome, well, that makes people pretty pissed off pretty quickly. So it's using the design to keep that sense of kind of ownership and involvement, while also making sure you get the efficiency. It's a really fine line to walk. And in some cases, full automation is valuable, where you can find a way to take a task off of their plate that is essentially a low value task that they've been doing for a long time. But then that's where the change management comes in, to find the higher value things they could be doing and get them engaged with that.
Yeah, thanks.
Guys, we're coming to the end of my material. Anybody else have any stories that they want to share about dealing with analytics, failures, wins?
Just building on that though, do you find sometimes it's not the analytics projects that fail, but it's the human emotion attached to how it impacts them that can sometimes undermine the success of an analytics project?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's most of the key failure modes, right? It's less actually, the analytics itself is solid, but the value of the analytics not being recognized, I still see as a fail. because just building a model, it's like, oh, we built software, we're done. And it's like, well, you've built software, but nobody's using it. It doesn't solve a problem. It's not creating value. Like, did you actually do anything worthwhile, right? Is that a success story? I don't think any VC or investor would say yes. So for me, it's the same thing where it's the job isn't done at the analytics, the job's done at the impact. So this is why, this is the key insight that took me a while to get to. And now it seems so simple, but it's that when we often think about analytics, we miss that key point that the human factors, unless it's full automation again, the human factors are such a critical piece to the actual success of any sort of use case. And that's where you have the argument for integrating design, because honestly, it took me a year to get the right to play in analytics. So they're like, we're fine, we build models, we kick ass, it's all good. It took a year of saying, this one was a failure, that one was a failure, this one was a failure. And here's why. I did that big meta-analysis across all of the projects we had done. And don't ever let anybody from McKinsey or Quantum Black catch me saying that they had ever failed. But it was more that like we didn't deliver the outcome. So why was that? Well, here's my analysis. Do we agree with that? Yes. Okay, let's get some designers in there.
I think that's it's a super common scenario whereby, you do, and like I've seen this time and time again, you have to appease like the experts before you really do anything else. You have to get them on the journey. And I think there was a couple really big ones that I saw, but just to pick on the medical industry, because you tapped off on that side before, so we might as well double down. But like I do remember with some medical devices, essentially, they'd been, a lot of the professionals and people in the industry had been using like a 30-year-old program, and that meant that they could sort of fiddle and adjust nerves sort of directly in people's heads, really, to get this medical device to work. But in the more recent years, like that software is 30 years old, in more recent years, they literally got a software which was done objectively, and you could essentially press a button and it would take all the measurements, and then the person would get a perfect profile. But the way that it was communicated was like, we've got this new thing, it's super awesome and it's super easy. So all the experts essentially went, oh, super easy. So for beginners, well, I'm an expert, I have a PhD, get out of my face, that's clearly for juniors. So the entire thing sort of back, like it fell apart. They ended up having to replace that new software with something else to dress it up, like literally lipstick on a pig, to dress it up, to make it more glamorous, to make it more, scientific, give those medical professionals that sense that they are still important. Even though a lot of the profiles that they were doing manually, they weren't anywhere near as good as that auto software, but they had to change the language with the new software, which they had to just repackage essentially, and not use terms like easy, use things like superior. And so again, that's even where language is important, how you introduce it, where you introduce it, and appealing to those egos, because it took a long time for the newer software to actually be used, and it was significantly better.
But you
the
think
data that came back on that, people didn't care about the data because they're still better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now there's a bit about the whole belief, when data comes in, it challenges a belief, you hold on to a belief harder. But you think, Zoe, this is a really good example of if you, whoever this was, did more of that customer research earlier, you could have found that out and designed for it, saying, look, our main user group are pretty arrogant and they're going to be hard to convince. So I'm working with neurosurgeons now. that's a hell of a group, right? So
that's not that far off where we were. And you're absolutely right. Like, so I wasn't there when the first one came. They essentially brought me in to be like, why aren't people using this? And I was like, well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But it did mean like when we had to do I was able to influence the redesign of the new stuff. But yeah, like you're absolutely right. And they never, they'd never spoken to them, whether I did or I pretty much did a global study, but on the empathy side.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I didn't do much on the data, like analytics side. They had a team of experts for that. I'm on the qual space, so I went and did all that. But you're right, I was like it was the human element that was failing, and stopping like this progress.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see this same concept coming to life across disciplines and across use cases, which I'm sure we've all had an example of it, but having that really clear evidence base to say, this is why I'm here and this is what I'm going to help you do, makes all the difference.
It's interesting, Dan, talking about mental models that Zoe sort of touched on, and you're talking about even what you're doing at Omniscient, and you're talking about understanding the maps of the brain. So I'm actually doing a lot of coaching on how to become a developmental coach. And a lot of it is trying to understand the maps as humans that we create for ourselves. And there's always this context of we create a map, but the map is never reality. We try and take this map in the same way an AI engine will do the same thing. We apply that to everything that roughly approximates that same scenario. And then we find at some point in time, this map that we've created doesn't apply well to this scenario.
Yeah, there's that old saying of like, all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Yeah, okay, that's good. I like that. Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm interested to hear more about obviously so you've gone through a few different organizations and working in that data and analytics space. But Omniscient, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, it seems really interesting to map the brain, because it's almost like you want to understand those maps, or it's I think there's some sort of I think there was I was just looking at the website, I can't remember the term, which was connectomic.
Yeah. So I'll tell you guys a bit more about that if that's interesting for everyone. So think about the brain. It's made up of two pieces or two types of material, right? There's gray matter, which is the structure. Think of it like the harness that our brain lives in. And then there's white matter, which is really, it's not matter. It's just incredibly dense connections. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to Southeast Asia, but I always think about like, if you look at the telephone wires in Thailand that are just like wires on top of wires on top of wires, that's a bit about how your brain works. And so Omniscient, first, we call it Omni. Omniscient I think is a fairly obnoxious name, but so Omni, it was started by a data scientist and a neurosurgeon, initially for neurosurgeons, because anywhere that you cut in the brain severs some of those wires, and every wire you sever does something pretty bad. So the way that neurosurgeons currently plan is they look at a bunch of 2D scans, turn them into a 3D model, and they often look at structures. So like a structure is, say, your frontal lobe, which is a big chunk of your brain, as opposed to what we look at is something called parcels, which is much, much smaller and much more detailed. And then we look at how all those things connect together, because the structure of your brain tells you something, but actually most of what happens in your brain is a communication across those connections. So we started out building a really hyper detailed map of somebody's connections, and you can make it personalized. Your connections are different from my connections based on the experience I have. And then as a neurosurgeon, I can really accurately plan where I'm going to cut and what I'm going to cut to say, hey, Lucas, you have a brain tumor, but I used to not be able to operate on it because I couldn't go into your, amygdala area without causing real damage. But now I can actually cut 10% of it out and you get another 2 years with no damage. I could cut 50% of it out and you get 5 years, but you're going to lose some feeling or emotion or motor ability. Right? So it enables that more detailed conversation. Now, my job is on the consumer side. So how can I take this incredibly detailed map of the human brain, our ability to take a scan and actually tell you about you to a level of detail you never had before? That's where the analytics come in. And then what could we do with it? How could we help you live a better life from a better understanding of your brain?
Yeah, really, really interesting. It's almost, yeah, it's different from what I expected, because I thought it was all about sort of the mapping consciousness or sort of getting into that which neuroscience sort of touches on, but neurosurgeons obviously very focused, like you say, focusing on structures and because I do see a lot of well, not a lot. There's a few startups out there that will focus on NLP, like neuro-linguistic programming, and looking at the meta models and maps and trying to look at patterns on consciousness and how we actually make decisions in our habits. And there's certain patterns you can pick up and help guide people and coach people through those sort of models. And that's sort of something I've seen. And I was curious if it was in that space.
Yeah, there's a lot of really exceptional stuff happening in the brain. I mean, it's the last great frontier, the brain and space. And we're continually trying to get more and more information on both of them.
Very much so. Very much so.
I know we're getting close to time. I just, to one of the questions, I think it was Elena, what can we do tomorrow? So if I had to leave you with 3 things on how to start to make these disciplines work better together, other than the proposition that lives behind why we should work better together. The first is, as I said, make time for capability building across the teams. By understanding each other and bringing our disciplines together and our different lenses together will create better value and a better ability for us to leverage each other's perspective to create better outcomes. The second, and this is specifically if you're in an organization that has translators, but there is somebody who is acting as a translator if they aren't officially a translator. So take the time to build those relationships, because the translator is actually your connection point to accelerate the process of getting data scientists or developers, kind of whoever technical you're really working with as a designer, to understand your perspective and be able to take your outputs, your view, and connect the dots for both you and the team. And the last one was make sure that you actually invite your colleagues to, we call it McKinsey problem solving. It's like a very McKinsey term, but like, you know, to when you come in and try to solve a problem, you sit in a room, you're building your journey map, you're synthesizing your research insights, you are doing your first prototypes, you're doing user feedback. Bring your team into those sessions, because it's very, very powerful to hear things directly and to be involved in the thinking. And vice versa, try to get involved in the data science. Even if you're just sitting there listening, you may be surprised at how much you can bring just by kind of adding some logic and some insight.
Dan, that was absolutely fantastic. It was great sharing of insights, great conversation, great questions for everybody in the audience as to obviously sharing your perspectives. But yeah, really appreciative of your time, Dan. Really appreciative of everybody's time on the call as well. As we always say, this community doesn't exist if we don't have an audience, or we don't have a group that comes together to discuss new concepts, explore and question and bring on new perspectives and take and understand how that reflects on us and how we can reflect on that. I think in the context of the takeaways from Dan, one thing I would sort of advocate for as a further call to action, maybe don't just look for the translators, but maybe take some action and work out how you can become a translator. Because the more we can communicate with each other from different dimensions and different domains, the more aligned we can sort of be in where we want to get to as a group, as a community, as individuals as well. So, Dan, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, happy to.
Really?
I just opened up the chat and I see there are a bunch of questions in there. Anybody who wants to reach out afterwards, I think you should have some form of contact for me. Feel free to shoot them through. Or we can talk to Lucas and find a way to take them up at another time.
Yeah, well, I think for one thing, I think what we might do is we might post those questions on our LinkedIn group, and maybe we can generate conversation around those, and maybe we can get your insights, Dan, and as a starting point, maybe, and maybe yeah, we'll see how we go. We'll do that, and we'll share that through the meetup page, and yeah, so yeah, thanks Dan, thanks everybody for joining us. I think if we go on that would be great, but that won't work either. But next, just a reminder, 2nd of December is our mega meetup, so we are all trying to come together as a group. We might be able to touch and feel our design colleagues, see them in real person. Have a beer. We might be able to have a beer in person.
Hotline to HR with that comment.
And I know it's closed captioning still on, so anyway, don't read the transcripts. But in all seriousness, thank you very much, everybody. And we look forward to catching up with you in the near future, and looking forward to a greater 2022 when we can start bringing some more new content in person.
Awesome.
Well, thank